What up? This is Rama Screen, and it's time for another celeb interview. And in the anticipation of what lies below, which arrives on demand and on digital December 4th, I'm here talking with the writer director of this new movie, Braden. How you doing, Braden?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, Rama.
Awesome. Thank you for taking the time. So this is an original works script, right? Your original script. It's not an adaptation based on any other material. And this is a mystery thriller, but there's an element of horror to it. And it's also science fiction. And one can also say that it's a bit of a erotic or paranoia thriller. So mixed into that. So what is the inspiration for what lies below? And was it always part of the intention from the beginning to kind of mash or blend these several tones and genres?
I love films that do that. So I think I have natural disposition to writing things in that vein. But as far as this film was concerned, it's actually the synthesis of really two ideas. The first being, I always had this image in my head of a light coming down from the sky and hitting a guy in the chest. And for whatever reason, I think I was probably stolen from some poster or other movie that I've seen in the past, and it was so locked in my unconscious I couldn't even identify it. But for whatever reason, I was obsessed with this image, and I took that idea and I started to ask the question: Who is this person? What is the light? What does it all mean? And did somebody watch? And what is their relationship to them? And then once I asked that question, I went back to a personal story of mine, which is when I was about 5 years old, my first ever crush was actually my stepmother. And she'll regale strangers with the story of how when I was first getting to know her, I used to walk up to her while she was cooking dinner and tug on her shoulder and say, "Hey, you should chase me around and try to tickle me." And she would oblige and run around the apartment with me and try to tickle me. And it's all innocent and sweet. And then you think, what if the roles are reversed? What if I was a little girl and she was a man? And all of a sudden it gets into this very sketchy gray area. And so I brought that into that image in my head of the light. And as I started to work out who this person was and what they were doing, that's when it got put into the lake, and everything else kind of flowed from there.
To go further into that, I want to ask about the location. Where is this cabin that you guys shot this film at?
Okay, well, great little story. So the cabin is actually three different houses.
Wow.
If you believe it, because we shot in Lake George in the Adirondacks for the Adirondack Film Commission. Andrew Meters, the commissioner there. It is a fantastic, really underappreciated area of our country. It's one of the greatest natural wildernesses in all of North America. And so we were able to find plenty of lakes, plenty of options. But the problem was everything that was isolated, the beaches would be very, very jagged, right? And so we really struggled to find an area that had this slow, steady descent into the water, which I felt was so necessary to make that walk into the lake so hauntingly stoic,
Hmm.
the way it is with John Smith. And so as a result, we had to kind of juggle things around and inevitably make one house the exterior, one house the lake front, and one house the interior. But it works. People tend to not notice. So, I'm very happy with how it turned out.
That actually answered my next question. I was going to ask you because I was curious. Uh, you know, when it comes to cabins, I get that, or I understand that it is a thriller's go-to move or go-to place because cabins exudes isolation, and cell phone services don't work there. For the characters. Um,
Right.
so I guess I was going to ask you, what were the challenges of shooting a film with such logistics for you, if any?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, one of the reasons I think that cabins in the woods are so common too is just because they're easy to do. It's logistically a lot easier when you have one location and a minimum amount of actors. And that certainly was true of ours to a degree. But certain parts of like we shot on two sides of the lake, and one side of the lake is much more remote than the other. And as a result, when it's raining, it's very hard to get a grip truck there,
Hmm.
right? So we almost had to cancel an entire shoot day because of the rain in order to get to this isolated locale. Fortunately, the rain dispersed and it wasn't as bad as we thought it was, and the grip truck eventually got up the hill. But it was, a nail biter there for a little bit about losing an entire day of production. So, I mean, that among many other things was a challenge. Just being that isolated. The cell phones did work out there, fortunately, and
Cool.
I did have to write into the script because I'm not a big fan of when people just say that the cell phones don't work. I think that I want to challenge myself to do something else, and so that's why there's the little, the router that you find out in the film. And so, yeah, you got to find creative solutions to all those obstacles, and hopefully we were able to do that with ours.
It does make it unique when Emma's character can text with her friend, on the outside. So that's pretty cool. So on that note, can you talk a bit about rounding up your wonderful cast for this project? Emma, Mina, and that hunk of a man, Trey.
Yeah, I mean, I feel so indebted to all of them. They're such incredible talents. I think they're all unique and special in their own way. We our producers did a great job putting the cast together, as well as our casting director Katrina Wendell George. And Mina was kind of the first to come on board, and I think because of who she is, because of her reputation, it brought a validation to the film that really helped us attract other actors and actresses for the other roles for the auditions. Um, and she was just incredible on set. And I told her very early on, I go, Mina, I'm going to rely on you because you're a much more experienced filmmaker than me. You're much more knowledgeable than I am. So I'm going to depend on. I think she felt that too, and she would always be very focused on me. And as a result, you earn the trust of the film set as a result because of that, right? And she was so incredibly determined every time she shot a take, whether it was the first take or the 30th, she brought it. She was just such a pro, and that's so hard to have that endurance, and to have that that flexibility and determination. So I really appreciate it for her, and Michelle is such a difficult character that she absolutely nails, and the insecurity of that character is what drives the film really. For Trey, the hunk of a man, uh, Trey was incredible. The first audition I saw from him, I realized how he could expand the material. He would take the most innocent quotes and somehow make them sinister, and he just had this creativity to him. He just tried things and he was willing, but he also had an amazing amount of control, which was really necessary because when we get into the subtleties of the film, for instance, the grab on the shoulder in the dining room where he first kind of touches Libby, um, whether or not how he holds, how long he holds his hand there, how he rubs his hand, all those things make a huge difference in how an audience perceives that, and you can't reshoot it if you realize that they perceive it a different way, right? So what we had to do is we had to kind of create like a creep barometer, and we had Trey dial it up and dial it back down level of creepiness each time he did a take. And so that when we went into the editing room and we started to get audience feedback, we were able to literally dial it in to the perfect amount of creep factor, right? And then finally, Emma, Askiri is there as well. She was fantastic. She brought the fire that we needed for Marley. And then finally, Emma, I don't want to take up too much of your time. So
No, that's fine.
I can't say enough about her. I still remember her first audition. I wasn't sure. Like I was so intrigued by her, but also curious. And so I sent it to a friend, and the friend writes back. He watches it and writes back. He goes, "Yeah, she's got a real Jack Nicholson quality to her." And I go,
Mm.
"What are you talking about? What does that mean?" And he goes, "Well, she's either absolutely crazy or a genius." And it didn't take long on set for me to realize it was the latter. I mean, she is a genius, and she's super cerebral. She's super in her head and focused and determined. And then when you say action, it just explodes, and it's mesmerizing. It's like watching a fireworks display in her eyes. She is so subtle, but there's so much raw and fresh emotion in every little wink, every little eye open, everything, that you can't take your eyes off of her. I'm convinced that I'm convinced all three of them are gonna just continue to go and do amazing things, including Haskiri, who just got into the Saved by the Bell.
Mm.
Um, we were so fortunate to have them, especially when we did, because I've heard Emma now is going to be in Lord of the Rings, so bravo for her, right?
Yeah.
So it's cool.
Well, yeah. When I was watching Emma in this movie, what impresses me the most is her range. She starts out, like the girl desiring a man, and then she becomes suspicious, and of course she becomes scared, and then you also have her, or you throw her into some physically demanding scenes, and she pulls it off. Talk a bit about directing, your directing style to get such a performance out of an actor like her.
Yeah. So Emma and I very early on talked about Libby, and we talked about how because Michelle is so flamboyant, so over the top, so big, right? That Libby, as her daughter, became much more composed and much more introverted, right? Because when we have that relationship with our parents, we often rebel and we become very different from them in some ways.
Mm.
And so as a result, we wanted Libby to be very grounded, and that's the way she was written. That she's very grounded, she's very calm, and cynical to a degree,
Mm.
whereas Michelle is overly optimistic. And so we were always focused on that, and that's why the subtlety in Emma's performance is so important to Libby, right? But at times, we would really have to discuss what's the point that we break out of that ground, that subtlety. What is the point that she's no longer this grounded teenage girl, but she's somebody experiencing something terrifying, and how to meet that reaction. So we had to challenge ourselves to push it, to allow Libby to go up, like to really be terrified. And so that was a constant struggle and something we were always working on and discussing throughout the film.
As I'm winding down to my final questions, I'm curious about this one. All the science stuff that John Smith spews in this film, was there a scientist consultant on the set, or how extensive was your research to making sure that John Smith sounds like a guy who can hang out with the boys of the Big Bang Theory?
Fair, fair. And you know what's funny too is that uh, Trey Tucker, who plays John Smith, is an amateur physicist, and he's in
Hmm.
PhD programs right now, even though he's acting at the same time. So he was very into the science of the film as well. I would say that there was two phases of my research for the science. The first was, before, excuse me, I'm in New York City, so you got
No worries.
but uh, the first was at the outset before I started writing the film. I just kind of researched anything science related that might relate to the film to kind of get the wheels started to turn, and that took a while, maybe a week of just general science that might relate. And then once I started finding the narrative and the plot, then I got into the really specifics because I'm a firm believer that people connect to specifics, not generalities. It's those things that transcend. Like the little arm scratch that Michelle does to Libby. It's such a unique thing, but I think people understand that "show me you love me" motion.
Hmm.
And I think that's why people empathize. So once we got into little specifics, like the little experiments at the dining room table or the lampreys, I really had to do my research and make it as authentic as I could. Of course, I had to take artistic liberties because at the end of the day, some of these things just can't happen, right? For instance, the lampreys. What's a lot of people don't know is that they're actually an extremely parasitic parasitic species. They're considered a cancer to any ecosystem
Wow.
they inhabit. So as a result, they're not allowed to be stored. They're not allowed to cross state lines. They're not allowed to really. If they're caught, you have to exterminate them. It's a rule, right?
Wow. Okay.
So in order to shoot the lampreys, I had to go through a friend of a friend who was a biologist studying a lake that had lampreys in it, and they had one lamprey that was able to go with a small crew and shoot. And so all those lampreys you see that multitude of lampreys is that one lamprey just over and over again, because that's the only thing we could get, you
Yeah.
know? The only reason I chose the lampreys in the first place was, well, first, they look cool, let's be honest. And second, was that they were the only aquatic species that I could find that was able to survive in both salt and fresh water, which is one of the mysteries of the film, why that's important, you know?
Oh man, so much effort going into that, and quite elaborate. And I commend you. Kudos to you, definitely.
Uh,
So I guess my final question is on a broader picture. What is your advice for aspiring filmmakers out there who want to come up with their own original script, original film as well, original flavor?
mm. I would say, man, it's so tough because everybody's advice is going to be different. I think the one thing I've learned, excuse me,
Mhm.
through my years is that the only thing that you can control when it comes to film, the only thing is your writing. That's it. Nobody can ever stop you from writing, right? Even if you're um, writing Harry Potter in a cafe on the back of napkins, no one can take that away from you. And so, no matter how rich you are, no matter how poor you are, no matter how much you struggle, write. If you want to write, write. You can do that, and and try to get better at it and better at it and better at it. And as you do, start to dig into yourself, learn about yourself, challenge yourself to change, and put that into your work. And I think when you start to reflect on some memories, on some personal experiences, you'll see opportunity there to maybe build that in to something bigger. You know, I mean, unfortunately, nobody's life is that interesting to just make it into a movie, right? But when we start to expand these little tidbits of our lives into something broader and something more unique, that's when we get really great stories, I think.
Final question. So what's coming up next on your horizon, and will you be able to work on that project during this pandemic?
Oh wow. Well, since the pandemic, I've been writing like crazy. I always try to keep writing. I'm actually, if you can see back there, outlining a script right
Yeah.
now. So I should be starting to write that next week. I have a ton of other scripts that I've been stockpiling for years, waiting for the opportunity to make something, because it's hard to kind of break in, and I'm hoping that What Lies Below will be my first time, really breaking in, and hopefully getting some traction. And then I have a Russian mob thriller called The Close and Holy Darkness I'd love to do. I have a sci-fi psychological thriller called Mold. I have a historical horror film called Nostrone set in the Viking world in Norway. I have a horror thriller set in Yukon territory called Amaruk. So I'm constantly writing. I would love to make another, and I think things are going to start to open up now that we have a vaccine on the way. I hope things
Hopefully.
do. Once we get over this wave, please everyone be safe. Stay indoors. We can do this together. Then hopefully next year we'll be making movies again on a regular basis. I've heard some productions doing it already, but I don't think they're fully committed yet. So we'll see.
All right, looking forward to all of those. And for my fans at home, everybody go check out What Lies Below on demand and on digital December 4th. Braden, thank you for talking to me and congratulations.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a pleasure, and thank you to everyone for checking out the film.